This video is just one in a set of videos called Presentation. Let's take a look at why presentation can be important and how we apply the basics to improve that presentation. Presentation is important, as I mentioned in my introduction video. Good photographers not only consider how their image looks on their own computer, but how the image may look on others, including mobile tablets and certainly PC projectors if you're a camera club member and you become involved in competitions. Let's consider just for a moment the image I have on screen if it was going to be seen via a PC projector or maybe an iPad. An iPad screen is likely to be a different aspect ratio to our PC screens, and the background we have set here in Photoshop may be dark grey. As you can see, I have grey around the outer edge, but perhaps on an iPad it could be black. So when an image like this that has a dark base is viewed on a black background, or maybe in a darkened room via a digital projector, the edge of the image can be lost into that black surround. So here we can see that in some circumstances it can spoil the composition of the image, because you may not be able to see where the image boundary is. So here we have the reason why we may need to consider presentation techniques, and in many cases all we really need to do is add a very thin line around the outer edge of the image, and that will pick it out and show the boundary and present the image much better. Now you can see here that I've instantly added that thin line. Here it's probably a little bit too bright, but I've just added it a little bit brighter than I would normally, so it stands out from the artwork I'm using to show you the idea. Applying these fine lines can be quite quick and easy once we know the process, and we can also automate it, but maybe we'll look at that a little bit later. For now, let's apply a manual line to the edge of this image. Incidentally, if you move your cursor between the frame on the PC screen you're viewing and the image itself and right click, you'll see that you do get the opportunity to change your background color. So if you wanted to see how an image looks against black, you can select it quickly and easily there. There you can see we're losing the base of this image. I prefer to work with a dark grey, but you can even set up a custom color. Let me just pick up light grey. There it is, gives you an idea of what that looks like. But I'll go back to my dark grey and we'll view the image on that, maybe switching to black once we've got the line in place. What I'm going to do here, I'm going to step my layers out on the right hand side because I want you to be able to see them at all times. The very first thing I'd like to do is to remove the lock you can see to the right of the thumbnail here. Now we can remove the lock simply by clicking on it, and you'll notice the default background layer changes to layer 0. What I've effectively done there, if we think of an image when we open it up, it's made up in two parts. We have a canvas, and maybe we can think of the image sitting on the canvas. When we see the lock on the layer thumbnail, those two are locked together. All I've done is separate the two, so I can apply a very thin line using the effects down the bottom left of the layers palette. Going down to the bottom left of the layers then, I'm going to click to bring the effects panel up. You can see I've got quite a few options here. I can go directly to the option that I am actually going to use here, which is the stroke, or I can just choose blending options and the whole panel will appear and we can make our choice from here. Generally speaking, the layer styles is what we're looking at. We'll always remember the last setting you use, so don't be too surprised if you go over to the stroke option here, tick the box to bring the stroke into play, and then highlight the box here so we can change the parameters. Sometimes you'll notice some odd things happening because it will remember the colors and the sizes of the line you last applied. So let's take a look at what we have here, because we've got black as the color, so clearly that's got to be changed. And at the moment the line is being shown on the outside of the image. So one of the first changes I'm going to make is that I'm going to move it to the inside, and straight away you can see the black line pops on screen. We'll go back to the size in a moment. If we go to the color and click, the first thing we may think of is, well, we need a white line. But quite often the white line is too bright, particularly if it was that thick. So I tend to find myself down here somewhere, and it looks quite grey, and you would think when you look at that it would hardly be noticeable. But let's apply it. Now I'm going to put my cursor into the box rather than use the slider. Now I'm going to use my down arrows, and you can see I can adjust the thickness of that line. So let me put just 6 pixels on the inside of the image using that grey colour. Now one of the great things about using this technique is it's easy to change. Let's click OK, and maybe we should take a look at the image against a black background. So let's go into the no man's land over here, right click and choose black. There you can see the line we've just applied. Now although we applied it quite a dark grey, it looks quite bold when we see it against a black background, and that's how it would look in a darkened room via a PC projector. So I think I'd like to temper that a little bit, reduce its impact. After all, a frame is there to support an image, not to compete with it. To bring that line back in play, all we need to do is go to the stroke, double click, there's the panel on screen, and we can make our changes. So I could choose one of two options, or in fact a bit of both. I could choose to reduce the size of the line maybe down to 4 pixels or even less, but I could also go to my color and take it down even more. It all depends on the image we're viewing, and that's why it's nice to be able to see the image against that black background. So we can go back into the stroke as many times as we wish, double click, and we can adjust the size and we can adjust the color. Let's keep it as it is just for a moment, but let's make a mental note that it's 4 pixels and it's in that dark grey. We have to bear in mind what resolution the image is, because that's going to affect the size of the line we're going to apply. But of course what we see is what we get, so it's no great disaster. But what I'm referring to here is, here we're looking at a higher resolution image. It's unlikely this image or an image of this size would be presented to a camera club competition. Let me give you a quick view of that via image and image size. There you can see we've got a 62 meg file, 6000 pixels by 3628. If we were applying the same line to a much lower resolution image, perhaps one presented in a camera club competition, then we'd need a slightly different setting. Let's take a look. Now with that change on screen, I've brought up the same image but a much lower resolution one. If you look up at the top left of the screen, you can see I've got one marked low resolution, and this is the one we was viewing a few moments ago. If I take you to the low resolution one, we'll just take a quick look at the size. Pretty typical of what many camera club members would be presenting to their camera club. Maybe some clubs are now becoming a little bit more progressive and moving up to the HD size, but this is going to be good to demonstrate what I have in mind here. So let me just cancel that, and as before, remove the lock to separate the canvas from the image. Then I'm going to go down to my effects and bring up my stroke. You can see the stroke here has retained the same sort of dark grey, so that's good. But what it's done, it's dropped it down to 1 pixel. Let me put 4 pixels, and it looks quite good on screen, but if I put the same number of pixels as the higher resolution image, you can see the point I was trying to make here. So with an image for a camera club competition, a low res image, we can see that 1 pixel is looking pretty good. So we would probably set the 1 pixel and we would vary the intensity of that fine line simply with colour. And look how close I can actually get to black. And it still does the job I intend it to do. With what I'm about to say, I could be accused of stating the absolute obvious. But it's not entirely obvious. Because there are times when we see images presented something like this, where the author thinks that because the image is warm in tone, if they use a red or a yellow frame, it's going to enhance the image. Rarely does it do so. Whatever presentation technique we're thinking of using, here's a bit of advice which I think is always good to follow, especially when we're using the technique we've just described here, because if I save this image as a Photoshop file, I can come back tomorrow and I can look at this image and I can instantly have it changed, no damage done. And that's the advice. Whenever you're going to present an image, live with it at least overnight, because quite often what we think is a great idea on Monday looks a little bit overdone on Tuesday. Save your work, look at it 24 hours later. If you're still happy with it, then it's ready to go. Now with the changing of the image on screen, let's just take a look at the same technique with an image that has a very light background. Here we can see the boundaries of the image, no trouble at all. And if I go into no man's land between the image and the edge of my window here, right click and choose black, of course if that was seen on an iPad or in a darkened room, then that too would be clearly seen, or the boundary would be clearly seen. But let's just right click and choose light grey. First thing we notice is that in actual fact Photoshop puts a very delicate drop shadow around the image, which we don't see when we're working in dark grey or black. But there are times when we're working with images on a lighter background, probably for print purposes, and we'll come back to this a little bit later, but the technique is the same. Let's just remove the lock, separate the canvas from the image, go down to the effects, pick up our stroke. Here we can change this to black maybe, and we can drop the size down. I'll put my cursor in there and use the down arrow, which I quite like to do, and there you can see within a few seconds I've gone down to 1 pixel. Let me go up a little higher so you can see it, but there we've got a very delicate line around the outer edge of the image. In no way could it be said that that is competing with the rose, but it works. If you're watching on YouTube, please subscribe to my channel and hit the notification bell so you're informed when I put up new content. You'll find a link to the remainder of these presentation videos in the Show More section below, and I've also placed a link to the introduction video too. If you're into digital audio visual, then you're going to find these techniques particularly relevant.